Welcome back. I hope that you're feeling a little bit more relaxed and centered as we go on to this next session. I know the last section was pretty heavy and a lot of information to explore and to digest. But this section, I want to start out with just a question about, is this cat going up the stairs or down the stairs? Put in the comment area below. What do you think? Up or down? I start the section with the cat because I'm not going to tell you if it's up or down. You can go and investigate that for yourself. There's a lot out there. Just Google it. However, I wanted to see if we had the same perception, which I'm sure we don't. I'm sure there's a number of people who thought the cat was going down the stairs. And there's a number of people who thought the cat was going up the stairs. I use this as a metaphor about what is normal. This is about getting back to normal, but what do we mean by that? And is normal someplace that we really want to go back to? In the comments or in the section below, there's a research about why some teachers don't want to go back to normal. And I agree. Maybe our normal wasn't so great. All of those things that I mentioned about youth were there. A high rate of anxiety, depression, high suicide rate, all of things were there. The pandemic and the last 2 years of what has happened had helped us to recognize that maybe normal isn't what we think normal is. So there's a lot of different stressors out in our world, and there's a lot of different responses to that stress. But there's typically three types of responses that are talked about as far as like how children or adults respond to challenges and stress. One is positive stress, and we'll talk a little bit more why it's good to have some positive stress in your life. But that's just kind of the normal up and down stress that we have throughout our day. We maybe have a little bit of stress and then it dissipates and we go on with our day. Now, there's another kind of stress that's called the tolerable stress. Tolerable stress is that we're responding to maybe a more severe stressor and it's limited in duration. And we also have loved ones that are around us, or we have protective factors that we can kind of work with to help us through that stress. So you have a stress, it may go on for a while, may intensify at different times, but we have those protective factors around us that help us to mitigate that stress. And then there's toxic stress. Toxic stress is that strong, frequent, it's prolonged adversity. So when we're talking about toxic stress with children, toxic stress is the type of stress that can change the architecture of their brain. So, as they have that developing brain, it can cause to change those ways that the neurons fire. So, you have a stressor, and then it doesn't go down, and you get stressed again. A hormone called cortisol is released, and that cortisol level never really goes fully down. So you can imagine if there's a baby who has an inattentive caretaker who is sometimes picking up the baby and soothing it. Sometimes it's yelling at the baby. Sometimes they are totally ignoring the baby. So it's a lot of that intolerable stress with very little protective factors around that person. Now, that down in the resources, there is a video about understanding trauma and survival brain versus the learning brain. If you are an educator, it is a great video to watch that will help you kind of identify how can we then help our students mitigate this stress, and how can we help ourselves to work with the stress. So there's a stress cycle that happens. We have a trigger or something that sets us off. It could be a tiger, but usually it's things like how people are treating us, or maybe something that somebody said, or it could be things that we detect as threats but aren't necessarily threatening our life. But when that happens, cortisol, adrenaline, we go into our fight, flight, and freeze, and go into either mobilization, where we have that burst of activation, or sometimes we go into immobilization, which is that freeze. So to move out of that, we need to do some things. We need to engage ourselves in things that are going to regulate our nervous system. And down in that corner on the left-hand side, there's a whole bunch of different ideas about how you can start regulating your nervous system. And I do a whole workshop on regulating your nervous system. But that moves us into connection and feeling that we're safe. And when that happens, it also affects our digestive system so that we can more easily digest. And there's a release of oxytocin and serotonin. Those are those feel good hormones. It helps us to also rest, because we're in that fight, flight, and freeze mode. There is no resting or digesting that's going on. And so you feel safe and you're social until the next trigger comes along. So having some things in your toolbox that are going to help you to regulate your nervous system is so important, and to regulate the stress that comes with things that are happening in our lives. Emily and Amelia Nagoski have written this awesome book called Burnout, and I will put a link in the notes to also you can go to a interview that they did with Brene Brown if you don't have time to read the book. The interview is awesome. And they talk about how that stress itself will kill you faster than the stressor will. Unless you do something to complete this stress response cycle that I just showed you, while you're managing the day's stressors, your body is managing the day's stress. And it's also absolutely essential to your well-being. The way sleeping and eating are essential, that you give your body the resources it needs to complete the stress response cycle that's been activated. So, in our next section, we're going to talk about what are some ways to complete that stress response cycle that's happening within your body.